We're now live. Okay. Welcome. Hi, everybody. Hi. I'm just going to do my typical talking and drinking water while I wait for people to show up. Hello. Welcome to yet another installment of Geek Speaks Greek. I am your geek, George O'Connor, clearly speaking English. The Greek I'm speaking in reference to is Greek mythology. Every episode of Geek Speaks Greek, we explore another goddess, god, hero, or monster from Greek mythology. Today we're on, today's a bit of a twofer. Today we are doing a monster as like the kind of big name brand. We're doing none other than the Sphinx, but we're also gonna, just by virtue of having to do the Sphinx, we're gonna cover a little hero named Oedipus. And get all your little giggles out of the way now, because Oedipus has kind of a messed up story. Oh, a messed up Greek myth, you say? I don't believe it. Yeah, I know. This one, though, this one's kind of infamously messed up, but we'll get into that. But before we get into that, I have the best fans in the world. I know this because they're always sending me incredible artwork they drew themselves. In fact, I was looking at earlier today, and looks like a ton of new stuff has arrived in just since I last checked. So, yikes. I haven't even seen a lot of this stuff yet. So let's see. Here we have. Wait, is this the first one? Guys, you'd think after like this is probably like the 14th or 15th, like 40th or 50th of these. You think I'd be better at doing this by now, but I'm not yet. I think this one is one we haven't seen yet. This is from Iliad. Iliad has sent us in stuff a lot over the age. Sometime, and she recently has recently branched into doing like pen and ink work. But look, here is Pegasus and Bellerophon. If you remember, our last episode was all about Pegasus and Bellerophon. Just the same sort of thing where we had like kind of like the big, and the Chimera. Oh no, wait, we did Chimera and Bellerophon and then Pegasus. Ugh. And then also by Iliad, here is, check it out. It's Poseidon in the water. And he's like, son? As he's looking at Pegasus flying overhead. Because we talked about that, it's kind of weird. Bellerophon, son of Poseidon. Pegasus, son of Poseidon. Do they know? One's a horse, one's a hero, one rides the other. Awkward. Do they know? Who knows? But Iliad, thank you so much. Those are really funny. I love the sense of humor people bring to these, too. Okay, so, alright, now this is kind of cool, and this is from Moira. And this actually has me tempted to do something I've never done before. First, she did, this is just a picture of, I actually thought it was Artemis, but it's called a hunter of Artemis. So I guess it's like I'm hoping it's one of her retinue and not somebody who's trying to hunt Artemis, because that's not going to go well for you. Don't hunt the goddess of the hunt. She's going to murder you. And it's done in watercolor. Look how nice this is. But this is super cool. Now, I'm an old, you probably know this. There's some things I do that are kind of associated with young people, like I play Lego, and I like to play PlayStation and stuff like that. And I also, I draw for a living, which is pretty awesome. But there's a game everybody's always talking about called Animal Crossing. And I always hear about Animal Crossing. And a lot of adults I know talk about a lot. I like listening to like a political podcast. They're talking about Animal Crossing. I'm like, why? So Moira has gone and customized a few Olympians in Animal Crossing, which is like the first time I'm like, I think I want to play some Animal Crossing. So check this out. I almost don't even need to say who they are. I just dropped the pen. There is an Artemis. Look how cute. That's pretty darn close. And this next one, this is my favorite. Look at the little Hera. You know me. I love Hera. She's my fave. And I think a lot of people make her mean all the time. This is the happiest Hera ever. And I kind of love this. So, I don't know. That makes me kind of want to play that, except for she's already taken Hera, so I don't know. Can you make a little Hermes in that? I don't know. So Animal Crossing, that looks pretty cool. I know literally nothing about it except for like you trade radishes or something. I don't know. And I guess there's animals in it, or at least animals being crossed with things. I'm not sure. But that looks pretty cool because you can make little Olympians. And I'm like, oh, and like especially a happy little Hera. So that's pretty cool. So this is from Jake. And if you remember last time Jake showed us a picture he drew of the Titan Minotius, and I was kind of like, Minotius rather. I'm like, is this from a video game? Because he had this kind of like really gruesome, what I thought was a weapon, which was a head on a like a chain, and he had a big sword, and it kind of looked video gamey. But Jake wrote to assure me it was not. It's just something he carries around to freak people out, and it's not from a video game design himself. I'm like, cool, okay, that's good to know. And so then we have drawings. Now this is kind of tricky to tell, right? Because like this is from Jake. Look how good that is, right? It's from the movie Gladiator, he says. And then his dad drew this picture of Icarus. And don't they all, I mean, no offense to either one of you guys because you're both terrific, but don't they almost look like they're drawn by the same person? Like there's some strong, oh, there's Dioris and there, oof. Well, and there's the Icarus. I mean, that's really cool. I also really like the design of Icarus's wings. Icarus is one of those stories that I want to get around to telling in the story series I do after Asgardians. If you look very carefully, I think in Poseidon, you can actually see my, there's a little background drawing of like my design for the wings. But I like when people, I kind of hate it when people just draw the wings looking like wings on arms. It's like, no, there's got to be some stuff. And I like that Jake's dad did that kind of cool, like techno stuff. So this is from somebody new who, as so far as I know, hasn't written in before. This is from Eric, and he calls this Business Poseidon, which kind of looks a lot like Poseidon, but you'll notice he's carrying a briefcase and he's wearing a tie. And I guess he's got a collar. But he's still like mostly naked. He's still carrying his trident, and he's still wearing a loincloth. And what he's saying is, sorry, honey, you might not be back in time for dinner. I have 10 ships to sink. They could be stubborn. Yeah, ships don't like to be sunk. I love this. I don't know what a weird idea to make that he's business. I want to see like a TV show where it's just Poseidon, like this enormous, muscular, kind of blue-skinned, naked god who goes to work, but he still wears a tie. And what's in the briefcase? You know there's not papers. It's just like he just carries around. It's probably got like, I don't know, starfish in it or something. He doesn't understand what's going on. I love that. Thank you so much, Eric, if you're watching, for putting that in, for sending that in. So now we have a few from Yehi. This one is, she calls it her Athena flag. And if you notice, Athena herself is the flag. Like she's actually holding off the pole. Which I'm like, that's clever. And also that'd be pretty cool. Like, I mean, how come that never happened? How come people, why were flags, how did the entire world decide flags were just gonna be like either rectangles or squares? Why did nobody ever do one that actually just looks like somebody? But like, again, Yehi, amazing artwork, amazing sense of color. Let's see what else. Now, Yehi does them backwards, luckily for us, so I can read this. See that? That's the guy who invented wine. Oh yeah, I saw him at the bar, which makes sense, that's where you would see Dionysus. Why is he talking to the fire? He's gone mad? I'm sure he's just drunk. Now, we know why. I mean, this is a little bit of a nod. So you all haven't seen it yet. You've seen little glimpses, little things I've shown you. But the next book, the last book in Olympians, is Dionysus. And it's told from the point of view of Hestia. And so I think that is Hestia having a little bit of a conversation with Dionysus, which leads into Yehi's last comic for the day, where we have this very famous scene. This is a myth we'll see our own version of it or take off in Dionysus, where Hestia surrenders her throne. Or surrenders makes it sound like she had to give it up. She gives her throne to Dionysus. And she's like saying, here, this seat is yours now. And he's going, wow, thanks, Hestia. Look at him, he's jumping up and down. But why? And she goes, well, Dionysus, let's just say that and then we zoom out and just look at the chaos. There's gods fighting gods. I love that like Hermes and Apollo are just like cheering on Ares fighting Hephaestus. Like Poseidon's flooding the room in the background. I mean, Artemis is sticking her tongue out at like, I think the three goddesses who were, that's like that picture when they're fighting over the golden apple. There's like Zeus fighting Demeter. It looks like just Apollo and like Persephone are just sleeping, and she's just like, I just need some personal space. And I really like that, and that's actually very similar to an idea that I'll be exploring in Dionysus. So Yehi, you're a bit of a mind reader. I'm going to change it now a little bit. Now Yehi, you're such a good writer and a good artist. It's just great. Now, these are from Megan. This is some fun stuff, because I think it was last episode. My cat Pinky made an appearance. Pinky is, I have 3 cats, you always hear them fighting in the background. And Pinky, I I hadn't been around a lot because I've been working, so I've been in my studio a lot, and Pinky needs a lot of attention. She falls asleep around my neck all the time. She constantly wants attention. She's sitting right here right now. She doesn't like to be more than like 2 feet away from me. And she hadn't seen me much that day because I'd been in meetings and working. So in the middle of the show, she kind of hopped up. And so Megan drew a picture of me holding Pinky, and she really nailed Pinky. She got that kind of big eyes look, and there's even like the Pegasus I drew in the background. It's so great. And she even makes Pinky say meow, which actually, luckily, Pinky's kind of a quiet cat. She doesn't make that much noise. She's learning how to meow, which is getting annoying. Birdie's kind of the meower in the family. And then we had also talked about, I don't remember why, I guess in Pegasus, because we were talking about Medusa, we talked about like the idea that Medusa took the snakes of Medusa's head and added them to, did I say Medusa? Athena took the snakes of Medusa's head and added them to the Aegis. And so Megan drew kind of like, there's like a version of the panel I drew where she's holding it and she looks into the eyes. And then like we're talking, like the text is like, she made her most powerful and complete weapon, this weapon to strike fear, which is kind of what I was talking about that episode. But then it's actually, she just thinks it looks good. And she's like, hey Hermes, doesn't it look nice? He's like, wow, you look striking. And Poseidon's all like, I hate her. Because, you know, it's his girlfriend's head. It's kind of gross. You know, Athena, we got to work on your people skills somewhat. Let's see. Okay, now this one, oh, how cute. Wait. This one just came in. I hadn't seen it yet. Look at this. This is from Joseph. Joseph sends us stuff periodically. Look at his little Pegasus. And he wrote his name, Joseph AJ. That's great. And I like the tail. Like the tail's braided. That's really awesome. Thank you so much, Joseph. And then we have, I think, one more drawing it looks like or something. Let's see if it is. Oh, this sounds promising. These are ones I haven't seen yet, by the way. Okay. So, first, here is a drawing of Hestia without her flames. I mentioned that we actually see that in Dionysus. By the way, everybody, I just colored some pages where you see her, like her actual skin and hair for the first time. Only person seen it is me and my girlfriend so far. But there's Hestia without her flames. It's beautiful. I will say also, my girlfriend says that she thinks Hestia is the most beautiful goddess I've ever drawn. So keep that in mind. And then this is from, well, that was from Renka. Did I say that? I hope so, because Renka's here. Hi, Renka. And then Renka's mom, well, first we see, oh, look, it's the shadow of Pegasus, right? And you go over, you're like, what? Oh, okay, so really, it's like, it looks like, this is really going to work, guys. That looks like that's Apollo bent over. He's got, I think, a woodpecker pecking his butt. There's a blue bird on his head. I don't even know what this green thing is. It looks like it's a weird dog or cat or something. It's wearing a feet. This is hilarious. So yeah, that's kind of like the truth behind Pegasus. So thank you everybody for sending those in. If you are watching, you're like, you suddenly have a hankering to do some drawing, I would love it if you send me a drawing at my email, georgeoconnorbooks@gmail.com. You can always catch past episodes of Geek Speaks Greek on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/user George Olympians. All right, now let's get down to some Sphinx stuff. This is gonna be, man, I thought this was gonna be a light one, and as I thought about it, I realized there's a lot of stuff you have to cover with the Sphinx, okay? Some of this stuff, well, let's just talk about the Sphinx first off. The Sphinx is it's a monster. She's a monster. She, key there. And in most sources, her father is Typhon. Her mother's Echidna. She's yet another one of those. You could kind of see, after we did Typhon and Echidna last week, I'm kind of working through some of those monsters, ones we haven't covered, ones who have their own stories to tell. And the Sphinx is pretty awesome. Now, interestingly, in the case of, I always say Hesiod above all, this is another instance where I broke off with Hesiod. Because Hesiod doesn't actually put the Sphinx's mom as Echidna and her dad as Typhon. That's her grandparents. In Hesiod's version, because Hesiod, he's all like the kids of Typhon and Echidna all have multiple heads and they have dragon parts. And then we get a little bit further out from there. And Sphinx only has one head. So he makes the Sphinx the child of the Chimera, who we did the other day. Chimera, part goat, part lion, part snake. And Orthus. Orthus is that disappointing dog who only has 2 heads, not like Cerberus, 3 heads, which is kind of weird. It's like, oh, that's interesting. They're also brothers and sisters, which, you know, in like typical of gods and monsters, that's not so weird, but we're going to be dealing with that stuff today, believe you me. We're going to have a story where that does make a difference, and it's icky. So I like the idea. Just go back to Typhon and Echidna. Orthus, come on, you're just a 2-headed dog. We already got a 3-headed dog. We don't need you. I mean, I'm being mean. So the description of the Sphinx is that she is a monster, and she has normally the head of a woman, like a human woman, the body of a lion, and she has the wings of an eagle. And sometimes she'll says like the kind of breast of a woman and stuff. I'm not gonna draw because that's dirty. Now, I'm going to draw the way I drew her. She's appeared in a total of 1 panel of Olympians. I think in Hermes, when I show a bunch of the children of Typhon and Echidna. So, first thing I do, in my version of the Sphinx, doesn't say that specifically, she has the face of a woman, but I gave her lion eyes because I thought that looked cool. Now, when in ancient Greek mythology, she's most associated with the city of Thebes, but in the stories leading up to that, before she comes to Thebes, which I'll get to shortly, she either comes from either Ethiopia or she comes from Egypt. We'll get into Egypt later, believe you me. So I like to give her the features, her female features, her human features. I gave her the features of an African woman. I actually if you don't mind lion eyes, which I keep saying I'm like lionizing something, which means to make something, to sing its praises. If you don't mind lion eyes, I actually made her kind of beautiful. That's probably because she's not actually smiling with her teeth showing, because I figure she's probably got big lion teeth. Again, maybe you like that sort of thing. Who am I to judge beauty? She has really good cheekbones, as many of my characters have. Now, this is where it gets pretty weird. It normally says she is the head of a woman. I'm like, let's kind of bend this a little bit. I actually gave her, she has the face of a human woman, but she has the ears of a cat. And instead of like human hair, she kind of has cat hair there. Now this is also key. She has the body of a lion, right? So I'm like, no, none of that mane stuff. We already had the chimera. The chimera is also a female, but she has a mane. Female lions don't have manes. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I already made that mistake with the chimera. I'm not doing it with the Sphinx. So my Sphinx has the body of a lioness. And that's super cool, because I don't know how much you folks know about lions. There's prides of lions. There's normally like the big male, and then there's a group of, you've seen The Lion King. There's, Mufasa, and then there's whatever Nala's mom's name is, and whatever Simba's mom's name is. There's a whole bunch of lionesses, and then there's cubs and stuff. The lionesses are the ones who do all the hunting. The Mufasa kind of just lays around. He's just like lazy. He's like, look at me, I got big hair. But it's the lady lions, the lionesses, who are the fierce hunters. So I'm like, that makes her more kind of awesome. So she just straight up, my Sphinx, has the body of a lion. There's her retractable claws. Not going to quite have room. I've read in some sources she actually has like the tail of a snake. I'm like, we have enough creatures with tails of snakes. And I never actually drew mine with the tail. If you look at the one picture I drew, her tail goes to the end. So, hey, it's up to you. Maybe she has a tail of a snake. I'm not drawing it this time either. And kind of key, she's winged. Specifically, the wings of an eagle. And a lot of times, I kind of like hypothesize about the intelligence of these various beasts. We know for a fact the Sphinx is very smart. Much smarter than the average person, in fact. So, like I said, her homeland in Greece is either in Ethiopia or in Egypt. And now you might be saying, oh, in Egypt, of course, the Sphinx. Even the picture I used today is the Sphinx. So in Giza, which is where the big pyramids are, it's like a plateau. There is the Sphinx. And the Sphinx, you know the Sphinx. It's a huge, famous sculpture. It's one of the most famous works of art ever made. And it's enormous. It's like hundreds of meters long. It's this giant thing. And it's thousands of years old. Most archaeologists put it at about 2500 BCE, that's a long time ago. And they've basically decided, what's his name? Khofre, I think, is the pharaoh they think it's meant to represent. And here's some big differences between the Greek version of the Sphinx and the Egyptian. So Greek Sphinx, head of a woman, is a female, has eagle wings, lion body. Okay, the Egyptian Sphinx, head of a guy, specifically a pharaoh, presumably Khafre, although other people argue other people, no wings, just a body of a lion. And my understanding of it is, you know who starts calling it the Sphinx? The Greeks. When you hear Sphinx nowadays, unless you're like a total geek Greek like me, and you probably all are, you immediately think of the Egyptian Sphinx. But I don't really think that is a Sphinx. I feel like the Greeks, when they encounter it, they're like, oh, that looks kind of like a Sphinx, and they call it a Sphinx. But I think the Egyptians, it was built so long ago, the Egyptians don't really remember who it was for. They had lost. I think it was just yet another, so the Egyptians are very famous for putting the heads of animals on the bodies of people. I think this was just kind of a reverse depiction of that. I don't think it's a Sphinx. I don't think this is meant to be, well, this one is. But I don't think the creature in Egypt is meant to be this kind of, famous monster. This one that is like the child of Typhon and Echidna, or Orthus and Chimera. So, just interesting. I just want to get that out there. And so you don't start seeing people calling it the Sphinx so the Sphinx, they say, was built about 2500 BCE. The Greeks start calling it the Sphinx at about 500 BCE. So 2,000 years pass between when that thing is built and it's just forgotten and it's literally buried up to the neck for a while because they just forget about it. And then they start calling it again. They start calling it the Sphinx. Now, the Sphinx itself, the name, I've heard a couple of ideas of what Sphinx means. There's this one modern historian, I forget her name, she thinks it's actually a corruption of an Egyptian word, which is interesting. Maybe the Sphinx is a thing, which means the living image, which would make sense, like that the Sphinx in Egypt is the living image of Khofre. Then, the Greeks believed statues housed gods, maybe the Egyptians did too. The Greeks thought that Sphinx was derived from a word that meant to squeeze, or perhaps another way, to strangle, because she was rumored to strangle her prey, to kill it. And if you look at the way a lioness kills her prey, they kind of grab it by the throat with their jaws and hold it until it can't breathe anymore, or they break its neck. So they strangle it. So that kind of makes some sense too. So, the Sphinx. Let's get back to the Greek version. I had to get the Egyptian one out of the way. That's like the big... it's the big elephant in the room sort of thing. Like, you can't talk about the Sphinx and not mention the Sphinx at Giza, but we're here to talk about the Sphinx, the monster. So this monster, like I said, comes from Ethiopia and or Egypt, and then she goes to Thebes. Thebes was now this is the Greek city Thebes, not the Egyptian city Thebes. There's various reasons that are given in various myths as why she does it. There's a version where Hera is angry at the town, so she sends the monster. There's a version where Aries is angry at the town, so he sends the monster. There's just versions where she just shows up. She's like, this looks like a nice place to stay. Thebes was a city that had multiple gates to get to it. And outside one of the main gates, in the hills surrounding it, the mountains actually I should say, one of the routes, the Sphinx sets up shop. And she just kind of waits on the side of the cliff. And as people would come up to her, she would give them a riddle. And like I said, this is like the Sphinx. She's not like as smart as a lion. She's smarter than the average person, at least. So this riddle is super hard to guess. And she would ask the riddle, and the people coming up, she's like, I imagine she's part cat. She probably had a really sultry voice, and she's like, answer me this riddle, and if you don't answer it, I'll kill you. And people are kind of like, well, I really don't have much of an option here. There's literally a giant lion, woman-headed monster with wings in front of me, and if I don't answer this question, she asks the riddle, most people don't get it, and then, depending on the version, she either strangles them, come on, she bites their throat, she eats them, she tears them apart, so she kills them. So, pretty messed up. Now, remember how I said this is tied in with Oedipus? Did I say his name? I don't know if you didn't say his name. Have you all ever heard of Oedipus? You might have, even if you... Oedipus, okay. Greek mythology is full of sisters marrying brothers. Zeus and Hera and stuff like that. And when it's the gods, I've kind of explained my whole take on this. Like, if you're an Olympian, there's not a lot of other Olympians for you to marry. You kind of got to marry your siblings. And of course, gods don't have genes the way we do. They don't even have human forms as their natural forms. Their natural forms, which you will see in Dionysus, you see it, it's a big ball of energy. So it's kind of not as gross as if, like, somebody's sister married somebody, well, if somebody was a brother, how do I put this? If somebody married their sister. Like, that's like, that's a big taboo. That's gross. But with the gods, it was just kind of like, they're beyond us for this sort of thing, right? So, there is this guy, Oedipus, okay? And so, how do we get into this? I want to make sure I start at the beginning. There's many versions of this story. The best known one, and you still see it performed today, is in 3 plays by Sophocles. There's Oedipus Rex, which you probably have heard of, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone. I'm going to give kind of a really rough rundown of these. So Oedipus is the son of Laius and Jocasta, right? And they are the king and queen of Thebes. And before he is born, and this is going to sound awfully familiar, Laius, who is the king, goes to the Oracle of Delphi and asks, tell me, Oracle of Delphi, the Oracle of Apollo, tell me about my son, my wife is pregnant with my son. And the Oracle of Delphi gets this kind of look on her face, and she's like, oh. And he's like, what? And she's like, your son is going to kill you and marry your wife. And Laius is like, what? She's like, yeah. And he's like, that's messed up. So he comes home and he's clearly upset. And Jocosta's like, what's wrong, my husband? And he tells her, and she's like, ugh. And they're like, yeah, we gotta do something about this. So when the baby is born, the baby who would be Oedipus, they do the time-honored tradition that we see happen in just about every other Greek myth lately, it seems. He takes the baby. He can't bring himself to kill the baby himself. It's still his son, even though he's been told by the voice of Apollo himself that this son is going to kill him and marry his own mother. So that's messed up. But he's like, I can't do this. And he goes to his shepherd, a royal tenant of his, and he's like, please, take this baby and leave it on the side of a mountain, expose it. Now, we've heard a lot of stories about babies being left on mountains. It happens to Heracles, it happens to Atalanta, it happens to Paris. And in all these stories, it never kind of works out, does it? So once again, the shepherd, he's carrying this baby, and he's like, I can't just leave a baby out to die. That's so messed up. So he goes into the neighboring kingdom of Corinth. And so the king and queen of Corinth, their names are Polybus and Merope. And they've been trying to have a kid for years, and they can't. And it's like kind of a problem because, they have to pass along, the family line. That's how kings are passed down the line. And so this shepherd comes, he has this baby. This baby is of royal blood, after all. And so he goes to Polybus and Merope, and he's like, hey, I know you guys are having trouble having your own child. Here's a child from the gods. And they're like, oh my gosh. And they take this baby and they raise him as their own. They name him Oedipus. And Oedipus grows up there, and he's really smart. He's very clever, like exceptionally so. He's got the bearing of a god. He's, typical hero stuff we hear. Very good looking, very smart, better at everything. He comes of age himself, and he's getting ready to become a man to go out into the world. And he decides he's going to go to the Oracle at Delphi. And he goes there, and he's like, oh, Oracle, tell me, what is my fate? And the Oracle, I don't know if it's the same Oracle. Let's say it is the same Oracle. She's a bit older now, and she's like, oh my God, I remember you. You're going to kill your father and marry your mother. And Oedipus is like, what? And she's like, yes, I could see it as plain as day. The voice of Apollo is filling my head with this. And Oedipus is like, gross, no, I don't want to do this. This is horrible. I love my dad. I love my mom, but not like that. And so he leaves. He doesn't go back to Corinth. He's like, clearly, I can't go back home because this is my fate. And it's really hard to bend fate. We talked about this. Only Zeus has done it, but he still thinks he has to try it because he doesn't want to kill his dad. He loves his dad, but he doesn't know his dad isn't his birth father. And he doesn't want to marry his mom. Again, doesn't know that. So he goes to the next big city over, Thebes. And on the way to Thebes, and this is funny because it ends up being the Sphinx is almost like a little kind of note on the side of this thing. You better believe that's the route he takes. And he comes, and suddenly this monster flies down and lands in front of him. Has the body of a lioness, the wings of an eagle spread out. This beautiful face just kind of licks its razor-sharp teeth and fixes on him with her tawny eyes, and she's like, "You have to answer me a riddle before you pass." And I honestly feel like Oedipus at this point, he's like, well, this is kind of like not the worst thing that could happen to me, because if I don't answer the riddle, at least I'll be eaten, and then I won't be able to kill my dad and marry my mom. So the Sphinx asks this riddle which has never been broken before. You go back to the earliest versions of this story, they never say what the riddle is. It's like the authors were kind of like, yeah, it's a really good riddle, trust me, it's really good, super good. But it's not until Apollodorus that we actually get the riddle. There's been other riddles written down, but this one is super duper famous. You've maybe heard a version of this. I actually went back to a translation of Apollodorus to get as close to it as I can with the original text, and I'm going to read it right now. What has one voice, speaks with one voice, but is 4-footed and 2-footed and 3-footed? And she sits back and she's kind of doing that thing that cats do where she kneads her claws, and she's just waiting. She's like, this guy looks pretty good. I think I'm going to eat him. And Oedipus thinks, and he puts a foot up, and he's like, and he speaks with one voice. And he goes, it's a man. You're 4-footed when you're a baby because you walk around on all fours. You know, you're on your hands and knees. You're 2-footed in your manhood. He stands up, like, "Rrr." You walk around on your 2 legs. And then, in your old age, when you need a can, you need a can. It's my can. You need a cane. You have 3 feet. And her eyes go wide, and she roars in anger. And I'm in some versions of the story, she flings herself off a cliff and dies. I'm like, she have wings. I mean, come on. Or sometimes she just lets him go. I don't know. But Oedipus is past, and he's feeling pretty good about himself, and he comes into town. On his way into town, he almost gets run over by a dude in a chariot. He's like, hey, watch where you're going, you idiot. And the guy's like, yo, you, watch out. And they get in a fight, and Oedipus kills this guy. I think you can see where this is going. He comes into town, and people see where he's come from. Like, wait, you just came from the direction with that Sphinx. He's like, yeah, man, I answered that riddle. The Sphinx is dead. And they're like, what? And they all start dancing. And the queen's brother, who's this dude named Creon, he's like, it's been a tradition here that so we have bad news. And he's like, wait, what? He's like, the king recently died. They're like, oh, he's like, oh, that's messed up. He's like, yeah. But the queen is going to marry anybody who kills the Sphinx. So guess what? Now you're the king. And Oedipus is like, sweet. This is pretty sweet. So he gets married to Jocasta, his mom, because the dude he killed outside of town, the guy in the chariot who's being a jerk, was his dad, Laius. So he kind of did it. He didn't realize you can't bend fate. His mom's a bit older than him, but she's still, I guess she's still pretty young because they have 4 kids together. And for years, Oedipus is a king, and he's a good king. He's very smart. He loves his wife/mother very much. He loves his family. Everything seems okay. But a weird pestilence settles on Thebes. It's like a plague. It's like almost like Apollo himself is really unhappy with something going on there. And he's like, what is going on? And he's like, you know what? This worked out once before, where I actually went to the Oracle of Delphi, and she gave me advice on, man, I almost did some messed up stuff, because he still has no idea. He can't go. He's the king. He sends Creon. Creon goes, and Creon's like, comes back, and he's like horrified. And Oedipus is like, what? Tell me what happened. He's like, I think we need a second opinion here. They bring in Tiresias. Tiresias is the famous, we'll do an episode on Tiresias one of these days. Tiresias was he was a seer. He kind of comes in. He's the one that lays it down. He's like, all right, Oedipus, I know you think that your dad was Polybus and your mom was Merope, and they are in every way that counts, except for one, genetically speaking. They didn't know what genes were yet. Your real dad is Laius. He's that guy you killed. He was the old king. And your real mom is your wife. And so you can imagine this goes over poorly. I don't mean to laugh. I'm laughing because it's so awkward. Jocasta, she kills herself. She can't deal with the shame of this. They had kids together. Oedipus's kids are also his half-brothers and sisters. Think about that. Oedipus is so horrified, he grabs a brooch from the dress of his wife/mother and puts his eyes out. And his youngest daughter, Antigone, also his youngest sister, she stays with him. She's the only one, and she kind of guides him. He leaves in shame and disgust. He can't even handle what he's done, and she takes him, and like they go on this wandering. Now, this is just funny. It's all right. We all know my feelings on Theseus, right? Theseus is a big creep. Theseus is a jerk. He's not a hero. You know, this Oedipus, really, you can't blame him. He didn't do anything on his own, but he was cursed by the gods. And what he did is something that most people find repugnant. And people just don't want him around, and he's blind, and it's just kind of like it's a bummer and stuff. And the only person who puts up Antigone and her dad/brother, Oedipus, is Theseus in Athens. Because Theseus is like, I've done worse. Come on, it's nothing. Have you seen what I've done? I'm a monster. So, and interestingly, Creon, his uncle/brother-in-law, has been pursuing him. And he comes to Athens, and he's kind of like, man, we gotta... And they kind of like just solve it. Like they don't fight. They don't kill each other. Like Creon was going to kill him. And Oedipus actually dies peacefully in his sleep as an old man, which is kind of like, oh, that's weird. You know, because we always talk about how Greek heroes normally die pretty bad. I feel like Oedipus's life was so terrible. Just so awful in every way that the gods are like, we gotta go easy on this guy at the end, man. He's got no eyes. I mean, he married his mother. I mean, there's just some stuff. There's some stuff going on with this guy. And he didn't do anything bad. He actually was trying to prevent something bad. Why did we do this to him? Like, this is terrible. We really need to examine ourselves. So, that's the story. I guess I ended up talking more about Oedipus because, like, the Sphinx plays kind of a small role in there. Like actually, if you read the plays by Sophocles, she's not even in it. She's just kind of mentioned. It's like, oh yeah, you're the guy who defeated the Sphinx because you're super duper smart. But, yeah, I think I got everything here, right? I'm looking at my notes like there's anything that's really for me. I wrote down the riddle. Yeah, so that is the story of the Sphinx and Oedipus. Now, I was joking about Oedipus. If you're younger, you probably haven't heard this, but there is a very famous, it's a psychological condition called an Oedipus complex, which is named after him because of him and his mother. Now, I won't get into it too much, but he didn't know she was his mother. I'm trying to make excuses for the guy. I just feel bad. Like, if this happened to, this is a terrible thing. But it is very interesting. It goes back to my whole idea when I talk about how it's different for the gods. Because clearly, in the course of the story, this is one of the most shameful and terrible things that can happen to a person, as the ancient Greeks viewed it. But then you look at the Theogony by Hesiod, or like just the Theogony of anyone, when these gods, all the gods, like they're, with the exception of Aphrodite, again, unless you're Homer, in which case he makes her Zeus's daughter, which is still weird, they're all related. But like they definitely viewed it as a different thing when the Olympians, because the Olympians were different. They're not people. They were something beyond us. Maybe it's even accurate to say we view them as people because that's the only way we can handle viewing them, which ties it. You'll see that also in Dionysus too. Because the true form of an Olympian is something an immortal eye can't take in. So when an Olympian who is like, say, the sister of another or half-sister of another Olympian gets married, or just like the straight-up sister, like in the case of Hera and Zeus, it's not something that's like shameful, like what happens to Oedipus, where he loses his kingdom and his wife/mother kills herself and he takes his sight. Like, it's so awful. Zeus clearly isn't doing that. Hera's like, nah, it's fine, because they're not human. It's a different thing. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Anika adds, poor Oedipus. Yeah. I feel bad for him. There's just no other way. Like, he literally does nothing wrong. He's born under a bad sign, I guess. It's fated. His father, Laius, his birth father, tries to do everything. Doesn't just straight up kill him, which probably would have been the better move, I guess. Does everything to prevent that from happening, and it doesn't work. It's terrible. The deck is stacked against him. And it's one of those things where you realize, it's really interesting, the idea of fate, and how unique it is. I always come back to this, that Zeus bends fate. And it's kind of probably why he is the king of the gods. Because we see no matter how hard they tried, Oedipus and either of his families, they couldn't prevent this. It was written and it happened. No matter what they did, this thing still came to be. And it's just, it's a stone cold bummer. Greek tragedy writes, yeah, this is like when people think Greek tragedies, they tend to think of the Sophocles trilogy about Oedipus, because like it's just full of tragedy. It's just like, Sparksfly asks, why didn't the Sphinx kill Oedipus anyway? That's an excellent question, and because the Sphinx certainly could have, right? Like, why does she? I feel like the Sphinx. Sometimes you see in creatures, in monsters especially, there's almost like a compulsive behavior. Like, I think the Sphinx was proud of her intelligence. And I think she thought that she had crafted an unbreakable riddle. And honestly, it is a really good riddle. It's a riddle that is kind of like, it's probably also the most famous riddle in the world now because of this story. So a lot of people know this one. But just imagine if you were the person coming up with that and you encountered it for the first time. You're like, wait, it's got one voice, but it's got 4 feet and 2 feet and 3 feet. Like, what? How does that make sense? That's like, I could do math. That's like 9 feet. What is that? Is it like a really tall guy? And he gets killed, you know? I think the Sphinx was so proud, and it didn't even occur to her that someone would get it, and that when it happened, it kind of rocked her world. I mean, according to some versions, she flings herself off the mountain to her death, which again, she has wings. Also, she's probably immortal because she is the son of Echidna and Typhon, or if you're Hesiod, Orthus and the Chimera. But still, pretty good chance that she's hard to kill. So maybe, I don't know. I guess it was just, could we say it's honor? Like maybe she, who knows? Maybe she came back after like running off and screaming and was like, I'm going to kill that guy. And she couldn't find him because he's already, off fighting with his birth father, killing him. Maybe, oh wait, I just thought, maybe she knew. Maybe like she herself had gone to the Oracle of Delphi and it's like, someone's eventually going to guess your riddle, but really let them live because what's coming for them is so much worse. She's like, interesting. I don't know. I'm sure somebody's going to draw something cool about it. Going back to Pegasus, why do you think Poseidon, a sea god, is associated with horses? That's from T. Mackey. That's a great question, and I've actually read a pretty cool explanation for that. So, apparently, Poseidon, so the worship of the gods, like, they come from all over the region. Like, for instance, Zeus, the earliest roots we could find of the god who becomes Zeus, like when people were worshiping this god, it was all the way in the Caucasus Mountains, which border on Russia, right? So people from all around the world worship these gods. And my understanding is that the people who worshipped Poseidon, like I don't even know what these people were called, because this is like almost in prehistory, we only have traces of stuff. They were a nomadic people who rode horses, and they weren't near the sea. But they would go thundering across the steppes, like the fields, on their horses, and the ground would rumble. So their main god was a god of horses and of earthquakes. This all makes sense. And eventually they came until they got to an ocean and they could go no further without becoming a seafaring people. And then they did. They built boats, they sailed, they entered the Mediterranean. And then they had this god with them, this Poseidon. He probably wasn't called Poseidon, it was something leading up to Poseidon. But he had always been a god of horses and of earthquakes. But now they were a seafaring people. They had changed. And when I'm talking, like this is taking place for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And when they came, now their god, who they brought with them, was a god of the sea. So we had all these weird disparate elements attached in. And then eventually, all of these gods that people bring from different regions, they all assemble under what we now call Greek. But there wasn't like a country called Greece back then. There was a bunch of Grecian-speaking affiliated city-states and things. And so these gods all come from different parts of the world. You see, like a lot of the gods come from as far away as India, like the early versions of them. The one exception is always, they say, Apollo. Apollo is the strictly speaking Greek god, but even he has some forebears that look like they have an Indo-European root. But that's where Poseidon's root, they supposedly, and I believe it comes from why he has this horse element. This is from Praetor 1983, writes, aside from the wisdom factor, what might have been the reason that the city-state of Chios had chosen the Sphinx as their emblem, putting her on their sigil and coinage from the 6th to 3rd centuries BCE? She's actually a symbol of a lot of cities. And you also see it not just, some of it could probably be chalked up to an Egyptian influence, which takes place in there, and the conflation of whatever the Egyptian Sphinx was beforehand, and the connection with the Sphinx herself. in Greek mythology. Now, I'm going conjecture here because it's not just Chios, it's other places like a lot of Egyptian cities. I think there is the wisdom factor. I think it's more the ferocity. She's like, you would see a lot of times states would adopt a very powerful and ferocious symbol, like the Gorgonium, for instance, the symbol of Medusa. Something to like show like, don't mess with us, we're scary. And this creature, this winged creature with like the body of a lion, and it's a female lion. Like I said, they're the hunters. And people would have known that back then. Like lions were actually a part of life you had to deal with. I think the ferocity of that made it a symbol that you didn't want to mess with. Coupled with the fact, if you knew the story of Oedipus and stories like that, it's also not bad to think like, hey, it's pretty smart. And to think like that you might be under the protection of a being like that, or at least that you embody the virtues of something like that, might be something that's not bad to have on your side. Let's see, I saw we missed some questions. Please draw your Oedipus. Actually, Megan, I've never designed an Oedipus. I decided pretty early on that I wasn't going to tell this story because you'll notice, with the very tangential exception of the Oracle of Delphi, there's not any gods in it. So this wouldn't have been a good candidate for a story to tell in Olympians, where the stories all have to either tie back to feature one of the Olympians or somehow reflect a core attribute or like a supporting character of Olympians. And Oedipus doesn't really hit any of that. So I never really designed Oedipus. I think my mental image of Oedipus, there is a painting by, I think his name is Jean-Auguste Ingres. Jean-Auguste Ingres. It's Ingres. I don't know how I'm pronouncing it. I might have the right first name wrong. And it's called Oedipus and the Sphinx. And it's just this guy, I actually specifically made mention to it, where he's like leading the 1 foot up. It's a side view of Oedipus, who's just like kind of a good looking guy with like an Athenian hairstyle. And he's talking to the Sphinx, and the Sphinx is very small. It's one of those things where they made like really? That Sphinx is like the size of a dog. I think he could take that Sphinx. But it's a really cool painting. Ingres is a great painting. Check out some of his stuff. A great painter. Check out some of his stuff. Let's see, WHS124 asks, if Athena hadn't cursed Medusa, but Medusa and Poseidon still had a kid, would it be Pegasus? That's interesting. So, right? There's something going on in that story. Because they were together, and then she was turned into a monster, and then she's quote-unquote pregnant for years. And it's not, the horse isn't born until after she's been transformed into a monster, and she's been beheaded. Like, I was kind of playing with ideas when we did the Pegasus episode, like maybe it's more of an embodiment of Pegasus, of Medusa's soul or something, but I'm like, no, I don't like that. I feel like there's definitely one version of the seduction of Medusa where Poseidon comes to her as a horse. So that one would make some sense. Yeah, okay, probably a horse. But Poseidon, as we talk about, his kids always kind of come out monstrous, be that in form or in personality, or heaven forbid, both. So, possibly? I don't know. There's some reason, which I couldn't tell you why she never gave... Maybe when she became a reptile, like... I don't know if she's a reptile. When she became a snake monster, her pregnancy was arrested. Maybe she was already pregnant when she's transformed, and like because of that, whatever reason, the Iliad, like Hera or the goddess, whoever, couldn't visit her and let her give birth. I don't know. That's an interesting question. I think it'll be up to you to decide. And then also, how does Chrysaor fit in there? Would he have come out? I mean, we talked about him. Is he even a thing? Who knows? Let's see what else we got here. Oh, Renka also wants an Oedipus. All right, let me just... I'm going to draw my mental image of Oedipus, but it's going to be me basically drawing that Ingrid from that painting I was mentioning. So I'm going to draw him in profile. He has kind of like the Roman arch nose, like the way Hera does. I'll make him purse his lip and give him a kind of a strong jaw. His hair is kind of like pulled back. It's like braided up front. Because remember, he is royalty. So he's going to have a fancy hairdo. He's got good stature. I don't think he's like a huge guy. He's like really well built and well proportioned. But he's not like, we're not talking like a Theseus or Heracles here. He's just kind of like, he's a good looking dude. He'll be dressed pretty richly. I'm just going to say, like, he's probably got nice even features. He probably hasn't worked like many rough jobs in his life. So here he is, he's just thinking. He's very impassive here. And let's just draw right here. A giant sphinx. Which he seems awfully calm for staring into the face of a giant lion woman, doesn't he? So, I mean, here's the thing. As I've talked about before, you've seen a few episodes where I've actually done designs on the spot. And after I did those designs, I went in my sketchbook and worked those designs over further and further. Like my Nyx, Nemesis, who I gave bat wings, I actually backed away from the bat wings. I drew her a bunch more times. I decided I like bird wings better. Whenever I design a character for Olympians, I draw them many times. So this would be like literally the first version of him I drew. And I do picture him prior to me, like when he meets the Sphinx, he's clean shaven and young. But time passes. And when I picture him as the older man who's taken his own eyes and is wandering around and goes to Athens, there I picture he's probably got like a scraggly beard and looks pretty rough. So I'd have to draw him many times, multiple different things. I'd also probably reread Sophocles because it's been a while and see if there's any specific mentions of his physicality, which I doubt because it's a play. It would be really weird to have like a line because like what if the actor didn't look like that? But, or just see if I could do research and find any specific mentions of what Oedipus looks like. But, the Sphinx, this is from CVQ Llama. The Sphinx is not just in Greek myth, it is also in Babylonian and Egyptian mythology. I don't know about any other. Yeah, so the image, I was kind of talking about the Egyptian thing. There is a creature. You tend to see it in Egyptian, it doesn't have wings. In Babylonian art, you tend to see a creature that it does have wings. The wings kind of, they'll be kind of stylized, where they'll be kind of like, they'll rise like out of the shoulders. In Babylonian art, I mean, I'm doing a terrible job. It tends to be very stylized in general. They don't like Hellenistic art where they went for kind of like a realism. And then there's kind of like it normally has like some sort of throne and like braided hair, and it kind of stares at you unnervingly. We've seen this. So this sort of creature, I'm not 100% sure though that this would be called a Sphinx by the Babylonians. I feel like that is people in the West, we knew the Sphinx from Greek mythology and we're like, oh, it's got like a lion head stuff. This one certainly seems closer. The Egyptian one, I'm pretty sure, is just something different and we just call it the Sphinx because of the similarities. Somebody's mentioning Tiresias. Yeah, I'm going to have to do an episode on Tiresias, but Tiresias is another one I really have designed. I do have some designs somewhere, I have to look them up. But it would be fun to kind of do an episode on Tiresias because there's some cool stories there. Are there any important elements to Athena or Ares designs when they are not wearing helmets? Okay, so this is from T. Mackey, and I've mentioned when I do drawings of my goddesses and gods, there's always clues in the way that I draw them. And the biggest ones in those, Athena leads by wisdom and by experience. She's a leader, so her helmet is designed to draw attention to her face because it even flares out here to act as an amplifier. Because in the heat of battle, she wants to be able to see her, and all these lines point to her face and draw attention so she can lead you. Ares, his face is mostly concealed, and I've said they really don't need armor. He actually just he just goes for intimidation. His helmet is very pointy. It looks like blades. It's just there to be the freaked out part. Now the question is there any elements beyond those helmets? Yeah, Ares, it's pretty easy to see. He's got like kind of like red skin. And he's got blood red eyes. That's to show the blood. And that's like the easiest one on him. Athena, some of the elements, they mostly go back to more to her, the way that she is dressed. So she wears the helmet, right? But she has it over her soft hair. And she wears her breastplate, but she wears it over her soft robes. Athena is a really interesting mixture between super hard and super soft, right? And so I tried when I designed, if you look, it goes hard, soft, hard, soft, hard, soft. So like she has like these beautiful, exquisitely like weaved robes that she wears, and like this long skirt that she wears under armor. And she has like her long flowing hair underneath her helmet. And I think that just shows the two sides of Athena. She is the goddess of war and wisdom, but she's also the goddess of making crafts, of like weaving, of things like that. So I did that very purposely to show like the bits of her character. She has gray eyes, which is also a mention. I mean, that's, she was called the gray-eyed goddess. But I think that would really be it for like their actual design elements. I would say also with Aries and Athena, I hewed pretty closely to the traditional depictions of both of them because they're dressed like Greek soldiers, largely. Athena's got the other elements where she's wearing robes and things, and she has the aegis. But Aries, they actually have a hard time, a lot of scholars will have a hard time identifying whether or not a statue is of Aries, because Aries just looks like a soldier. And, sometimes you look at a statue and it looks like a naked guy with a helmet. You're like, all right, maybe it's a naked guy with a helmet, or maybe it's Aries. It's a little hard to tell if there's not a specific reference to a myth or something. Let's see what else we got here. And have I ever thought about doing a graphic novel of the Greek dramas? Like where I would just do like a straight adaptation of some dramas? I don't know. I've certainly drawn on different Greek, like just today talking about Sophocles. I mean, that's more of a tragedy, but I draw on different dramas and stuff. If that's a source for mythology, I'll draw on it. I haven't really done too many stories that are just straight adaptations of one source. A few I could think of, like my book Zeus is it's not direct. I pulled in stuff from other material, but it's a pretty close adaptation of the Theogony by Hesiod above all. The Iliad, not the Iliad, Aries, I do quite a bit of the Iliad in there, but it's like super truncated. I only did the parts dealing with the gods because it's this longest thing in the world. So I don't know, maybe that might be something. There's nothing that like I've read that I'm like, I want to do a full-length graphic novel of that, because that's a lot of work. I like to be able to kind of come in, do my Olympians, kind of explore the character of the goddess or god that the book's about, and then just kind of dip out again. Let's see. Odin isn't immortal, so I would say Zeus. Well, I don't know what that's in reference to. I'm guessing that's a fight between Zeus and Odin. Yeah, Zeus would destroy Odin. I'm sorry. The thing about the Asgardians, I've said this before, and this kind of ties into the idea of what I was saying today about Sphinx. Sometimes, depending which culture we're familiar with first, we let it color the ideas. Like, you know how like they'll say dragons exist in every culture. There's dragons in Europe, and then there's dragons in China. The Chinese version of the dragon is different enough that it's not really the same thing. It just kind of looks similar, so we call them both dragons, but they're not really the same thing. The Sphinx in Egypt looks similar to the Sphinx in Greek, but it's really a different thing. And the Norse gods were similar to what we consider the gods of Greece, so we kind of always group them together. But when you read the stories about the Norse gods, there's some really big differences. They are not immortal, and they age. Like right there, that's two big things. They eat apples that kind of slow down the aging process, but when they don't get those apples, the apples of Idun, they age. And there's stories where they die. The Ragnarok is the story of pretty much all of them dying. And the Greek gods don't die. So they're operating on a completely different level. Like, so we call them gods, but it's like different species of gods, I guess. Because, it's very different concepts. So yeah, like the idea of Zeus is a dude who in his stories, like, uproots continents. He could do almost anything as long as he thinks about it. Odin operates on a much closer, well, not to us, he can still destroy us, but he operates on a much, like, lesser thing. Also, the Asgardian myths, the Norse myths are kind of weird. They just kind of like, sometimes they're inconsistent, even compared to like the way the stuff in Greek mythology is inconsistent. You'll find that with Norse mythology, it's even more inconsistent sometimes. Sometimes Thor is really strong, sometimes he's not nearly as strong. Let's see, we're down to the last 2 minutes. Somebody will do an Orion episode. That's a good idea. I should do an Orion episode. And, oh man, there were so many questions, and I kind of, I spent too long. Who do we think is the oldest god? Not as in sibling order, but as the most ancient following or cult. Oh, Alicia Sophia, that's a great question. Gosh, that's hard to say. Because interestingly, like, you'd think like Dionysus, for instance, would be one of the last guys to go in cult, but they have records of his name in the Linear B text from Knossos. So he existed before there were like even quote-unquote Greek gods, as did most of the Greek gods. But like, it's kind of hard to tell. And then it depends, when do you decide, at what point does the god in the Caucasus Mountains that became Zeus, at what point is he Zeus? Do we count him all the way back like 5,000 years or more when he was there? Or do we count him when he's actually called Zeus in Greece, when the cult had, That's a question I wish I'd seen before, because I would just kind of muse about that for a long time. Muse, it's hard to say. Maybe we'll come back to it in a future one. So I should sign off because I have 40 seconds left. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into this very eclectic episode about the Sphinx. I want to do some more stuff in the Sphinx. Maybe I'll do a story of Oedipus one of these days. Maybe I'll make it a free comic on my website or something as a follow-up to Asgardians. I don't know. Write to me. Send me your pictures, if you could, that you draw of the Sphinx or whatever at my email, georgeoconnorbooks@gmail.com. And thanks a lot for tuning in. And I'll see you all on Wednesday. Thank you. Bye-bye.